wrap up and see what we have covered, so you can go back and review things if you ever want to. First thing we've learned about is how to do classes in C++ with Unreal. We've learned about the uClass macro, we've learned about the uStruct macro and how they're used differently. We've looked at how you can reparent actors and components to C++ actors and components and how that's the main way that we communicate between Blueprint and C++. Then we have looked at the lifecycle methods that replace the lifecycle events in Blueprint, the constructor, begin, play, and tick, or tick component. And we've looked at attaching components to actors entirely in C++ in the constructor. Then we went on to have a look at exposing functionality from those C++ classes into the Blueprint classes. We did this using the uProperty macro. We had options such as edit anywhere, Blueprint read write on that macro that allows us to access variables from C++. We also had a look at the uFunction macro, which had options such as Blueprint callable, Blueprint pure to allow us access again from Blueprint. We also looked at events, which kind of went the other way. So we saw the Blueprint implementable events and the Blueprint native events that allowed us to call Blueprint functionality from C++. And we looked at delegates and the different options they have, such as multicast, dynamic, events even, as opposed to delegates, and when you might use them, and that we mostly want to use dynamic when working with Blueprint. We also saw how we can migrate existing functionality in Blueprint over to C++. We saw how we could migrate properties that already existed, functions and events, how they could all be called from C++ or they could be implemented in C++. We did input binding for the player pawn, and we had a look at how you can find C++ versions of Blueprint nodes that you're already using so that you can use Blueprint as a discovery tool, but then do the implementation in C++. Now, there's a few avenues for extra exploration in this project if you want to get some practice of the skill of moving things across from Blueprint to C++. The first, perhaps lowest hanging fruit, is to get rid of any deprecated uses of our getQuest function. So remember that we migrated getQuest into C++, but we left a deprecated function in there and a deprecated struct. You could go ahead and make sure you remove that throughout the project and check that it still all works. The next thing to have a go at is setting up the camera and the grabber in C++. This camera and grabber components of the first-person character. You can see that they're currently set up in Blueprint. We had to have a Blueprint implementable getter in order to get access to that in C++. The better way would be to set them up hierarchically in the C++. You may have to do a little bit of further reading to see how you can attach it to the root node that already exists there, that capsule component. But you'd need to create a camera component and a grabber component to do that. The next thing to look at is migrating the rest of the grabber component. So there is not much functionality left here. We've got some stuff going on in tick that you could probably figure out. And we've also got this event notify quest actor, which might be slightly more tricky, might require you to migrate across some functionality of the quest trigger. Which brings us on to the fact that you can migrate across all of the three completion triggers. If we go to the main map, we'll go to content, and we're going to have a look at quests completion triggers. You can see there are three in here. You could go and have a look, figure out what the functionality is doing in Blueprint, and try and bring that over into C++. Some of them are going to be trickier than others, so open them up and have a try. Now, getting to the slightly more tricky extra credit stuff, you could make a static getQuestManager function that is implemented entirely in C++. So if you have a look at our bpquest library, you can see that a lot of the blueprints are using this getQuestManager function to get hold of the global quest manager. And they are getting access to this BP main game mode. So in order to create a static version of this, you may have to implement a Blueprint implementable getQuestManager on the main game mode and a parent class to the main game mode in order to do that. And then you could create a static C++ function that gets hold of the game mode from a given world context object. So you'd have to have a little bit of a look into how to achieve that. Which brings me on to my final challenge, which is to migrate the whole of that main game mode blueprint into C++. Now, you don't have to go ahead and do all of these, but by all means, if you do, you know that you will be ready to migrate almost any project from Blueprint to C++. So thank you for coming with me on this journey. Again, I have been Sam.